Hi and welcome to Lois and Morgana Davidson Art. It's Lois here, and today I'm going to be doing something slightly different. The lovely people at Etchr Labs have sent me one of their perfect sketchbooks, something that I've been really admiring for a few years, ever since I saw a review by Steve Mitchell of The Mind of Watercolour. So this is what I've painted for you today. This simple sketchy sort of snow scene, just trying out the paper to see whether I like it. It's always a bit difficult, I think, for me and for most artists, trying new paper that behaves in a completely different way. Most cotton papers are sized in a very particular way that their manufacturers have developed over time. So each paper seems to have a completely different sort of character. Even the cellulose pulp ones do. So you often find that once artists find a particular brand or make of paper or sketchbook, they pretty much stick with that or a couple of different types that they get used to and that they really like. My normal go-to sketchbooks of this size, that's A4 landscape, are the ordinary Etchr sketchbooks, which have a lighter weight paper than this. I think that it's about 200 GSM or I suppose about 80-90 pounds weight maybe. Whereas this has 300 GSM weight paper, and I think that's about £140. So it's what I'm used to using for my normal paintings. So the specs for the sketchbook, the perfect sketchbook, is it's A4, which is 29 by 21 centimetres or 11.4 by 8.3 inches. It's in landscape format. It's artist grade 100% cotton watercolour paper, 300 GSM, cold pressed, archival grade. It has an expandable inner pocket, a PU cover and 44 pages. Like the ordinary Etchr sketchbooks, it has this elastic over the end just to keep the pages together. It opens out fairly flat. I think if it was had a sort of a ring binding, you could fold it even flatter. But for studio work, I think it's absolutely fine. The paper is really nice. You can see it's got quite a lot of thickness to it. The texture's great. The weight is really good. Well, it feels like that at the moment. Certainly feels like a good quality paper, and the texture is lovely. It looks like it's going to create a nice surface to paint on. So I'm going to start off by putting some masking tape around the edge, as you can see here. This will give me a sort of cleanish border when I finish painting, and I quite like that. I think it's a way of being able to see the painting with fresh eyes, but it actually looks really nice as a sketchbook page. So the first thing I'm going to do is just draw in a few little pencil marks to guide me. I'm going to paint a sort of a subtle sunset snow scene, a sort of default scene. I don't want to do anything too ambitious or fancy today because, as I say, I'm just going to test the paper. I want to see how it reacts to being painted on wet in wet, what the texture's like, how the paper deals with the water and the paint, how long it stays wet or damp for and workable, whether it flattens out when it dries, whether I can lift from it and blend, all those sorts of things. So, as I say, putting in this very simple sketch with a sort of a horizon line, distant trees, some foreground trees, I think that should give me enough scope to be able to test out the sketchbook. And I forgot to mention the colour of the paper. It's what I'd call a nice natural white, which is sort of a pale cream as opposed to a bright high white. And I think natural white is really nice for sketchbooks, unless you're painting botanicals where you do need that really strong white of the paper. So I've used a wash brush and wet my page all over, and now this is a mixture of indigo and a little bit of Payne's grey and a little bit of lavender being added into it now, just to give me a sky. As I say, I've got no idea how this paper is going to react at the moment. It seems to be going on okay. I can see the texture working very nicely. Thinning out the wash as it comes down towards the horizon. And then getting a bit of tone across the snow. Some nice sort of shadow and this nice sort of lavender pale blue. Then I need to mix up a slightly richer mix, not too wet, of indigo, Payne's grey, and I'm adding my distant tree line and my sort of mid-ground trees. If I paint these in wet, you can see that I've thickened up my paint mixture here so that I can get these shapes to sort of stand out a little bit more, because this is my mid-ground stand of trees, and then just some slightly darker ones across the horizon line on this side. Those will mostly be hidden by the foreground trees, so they're less important. And then just a little bit of texture and tone across the foreground. Painting it all in wet, it should all just soften back and give me some nice soft edges for my background. Now I've just noticed I'm getting some runbacks in my sky. My observations is the paper has begun to cockle or buckle a little bit, but a dry brush has sorted out those marks in the sky, and I can just add a little bit more paint, dry paint, not wet paint, because otherwise that will make it worse. Dry paint across those areas, and hopefully that'll sort of soften out to give me that sort of scud of cloud across the top. And then quickly, before the paper's dry, because it is beginning to dry now, a little bit of burnt sienna into the sky and then reflected into the snow for that sort of sunset glow. I'm hoping that will soften back too. So another observation, I don't think this paper stays wet for as long as my usual default Saunders Waterford or Milford paper, but then they are well known to be the ones that hold water for the longest. But it's not doing too badly. So now I can go back in. As you can see, my mid-ground trees and distant trees have softened back, so an even richer, darker mixture of indigo, Payne's grey, a little bit of neutral tint actually, I think it is, not Payne's grey, so sorry about that. I'm used to saying Payne's grey, and neutral tint is a fairly recent addition to my palette. A little bit more over the other side, then using the tips of this Princeton Aqua Elite brush just to gently touch into the background for those really distant trees, just sort of hit and miss there. So I'm working quickly because I'm now aware that the paper dries quicker than I'm used to. So I want to try and get everything done first quickly, like now a clean, damp, flat brush, lifting out some light across the horizon line and then underneath the tree line as well. It lifts really well. I must say that was really easy to get that lift. And the cockling that you can see, that's quite normal, especially for a sketchbook, because it's not actually taped or clipped down to a board. It's a loose page, if you see what I mean. But the thing will be to see whether or not it flattens out once dry. So I think I'm pretty much there for painting. I think I just want to etch out a few tree trunks before it dries fully. There's been quite a change of light. The sun has just come beaming in through the windows of my studio, so it's sort of a little bit bleaching things out and making it look a little bit overexposed. But it's looking pretty good at the moment. So starting off with the corner of a plastic store card, I'm etching through the paint just before it dries and revealing the white of the paper, and that will give me my birch tree trunks against the darker background trees. I think you can see that happening now. I'll extend those lifted etched marks up into the sky to give me the starting off points for my branches, and also some light. And then a little bit of shadow around the base of the trees and across the tape on the left. And now I'm going to use a palette knife to etch in similar marks against this, over this mid-ground tree line. The palette knife gives me a really fine etched mark through to the white of the paper, and that's just going to be some light catching on those trunks there. And I think you can see now where it's sort of buckling quite a bit. So I think what I'm going to do is I'm going to use my clips and clip the paper, the page to the actual whole book itself, if you see what I mean. And hopefully that should just give it a chance to flatten. And now with a clean damp flat brush, just putting through some lighter clouds, sort of small fine ones scudding through the sunset sky. And I think I've misjudged that. That's not the paper's fault. It was too dry. I shouldn't have done that. I should have left that alone. It may soften back as it dries, but if not, I can correct it, hopefully, by softening it when it's fully dry. So this is what I mean when I say it takes a while for you to get used to using a new paper and to get used to the water control, drying times, and all that good stuff. But it's lovely paper so far. I must admit, I'm really enjoying painting on it. And now I need to step away and leave it to dry completely. So here it is. It's dried really nicely. I'm loving the look of it, and it's virtually flat. The paper, there's a little bit of sort of wave to it, but that's hardly surprising, considering it's a sketchbook rather than a page that you could either pre-stretch or sort of flatten and tape to a board. So now to finish off the painting, I'm going to paint in some darker trees, working around the pale marks that I etched in when it was damp, using my Pro Art sword liner. It's a size small, it's synthetic, it's got lovely long hairs that holds a lot of paint, and I can dab off some of the dark from the trunks to break them up a bit and to even give me those lighter textures on the trunks, even on the dark ones that are in shadow. That's such a distinctive feature of birch or aspen bark. So just continuing with the tip of the sword liner, giving me these lovely fine lines for this tracery of twigs coming up across this half of the page and leaning across the sunset as well. So the next test for this paper is to try to mend these marks that I made in the sky when it was just too dry to actually create those feathery clouds. So that's a clean, damp mop brush, and you can see I've just softened back some of those ugly lines, and I think that actually looks a lot better now. Just gives me that really quiet sky, because the sky is not the main feature of the painting here. It's the snow and the foreground trees. So this is a flat brush. I'm using lavender and neutral tint with a little bit of indigo in it, and keeping my brush strokes fairly horizontal, just putting in some shading and shadows just to indicate the flat of the land, maybe some sort of textures and shadows in the snow. And then maybe lifting off a little bit with a tissue just to sort of blend and soften. And I think I'm going to stop there so that I don't overwork it. I think I've given the paper a good old test. We've really used quite a lot of water on it, more than I would normally in a sketchbook. So I'm going to remove the tape and have a look at it and see how it looks with its clean white border. But I think, apart from the fact that I think it would take me a little while to get used to the particular characteristics of this paper, it's a beautiful paper. I really like the texture. I love the way it takes the paint. It's layered up really nicely. It's softened and diffused beautifully whilst waiting for things to dry. It was great for etching, and that's an important part of my style in landscape painting. And another very important characteristic, it's forgiving enough for me to mend mistakes, i.e. soften back any kind of marks that I'm not keen on once it's dry. So I think by now you've probably gathered that I really like this sketchbook. Well, I love it that they sent this to me to try free of charge. Thank you so much, Etchr Lab. By the way, this isn't sponsored. They just sent it to me and wanted to know what I thought. And what I think is that I really like it, and I would probably go out and buy another one in hot press because this is cold press. I think it's great size for me for studio sketching, working up sketches from plein air or ideas in the studio. And I would probably buy two of the A5 size, the smaller size, and they would be absolutely perfect to take out in the field with me. I shall leave a link to Etchr below if you're interested in checking out their products. And they've also sent me some of their watercolour pans, a nice set of 24, which Morgana will be trying out for you in a month or so. So I hope you enjoyed that painting, a nice little sketch, lots of fun to do. Have a go at something like that yourself, and take a look at the Etchr products if you sort of want to know a little bit more. So thank you so much for watching. Please like and subscribe if you haven't already, and click on the bell icon if you want to know when we post. I post on Wednesdays and Saturdays, and Morgana posts on Mondays, so plenty there for you to watch and enjoy if you're interested in watercolour painting. And of course, a special thank you to my wonderful Patreon group who support this channel. And I'll see you again soon, and happy painting. Bye.